The past week has been terrible for regional security in South Asia. On Saturday, peace talks between Pakistan and Afghanistan collapsed after yet another border skirmish. On Monday, there was a terror attack in New Delhi, the deadliest in India's capital since 2008, and on Tuesday, there was another terror attack in Islamabad. Like the attack in New Delhi, this was the deadliest in Pakistan's capital since 2008, and sparked a furious reaction from Pakistan's foreign minister, who blamed India for financing terror groups and refused to rule out going to war with Afghanistan. So, in this video, we're going to look at what's happened this past week, what might happen next, and why Pakistan has no good options. If this kind of topic is interesting to you, you'd enjoy the next issue of our magazine Too Long, where we're talking about the new Middle East. In this issue, we'll be running through each country in the region and talking about their future, before reflecting on how recent events have reshaped the Middle East forever. Pre-order your copy or subscribe by clicking the link in the description. So let's start with some context. We've gone through this many times in previous videos, but the TLDR is that until recently, the Taliban and Pakistan were actually pretty good mates. Pakistan supported the Taliban and the wider Mujahideen in their fight against the Soviets in the 80s, and was one of just 3 countries to recognise the Taliban as the legitimate government of Afghanistan when they conquered Kabul in 1996, along with Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Pakistan even maintained relations with the Taliban during the US occupation of Afghanistan, which began in 2001. This irritated the US, but Pakistan was unwilling to cut ties with the Taliban, largely because Pakistan always suspected the Taliban might eventually return to power, and wanted to keep them on side to prevent the Taliban from hosting terror groups that might attack Pakistan, including, most notably, the Pakistani Taliban or TTP, who've waged a violent insurgency against the Pakistani state since 2007. Unfortunately for Pakistan, when the Taliban returned to power in 2021, they made basically no effort to stop terror groups, including not just the TTP, but also other groups such as the Baloch Liberation Front, a Baloch separatist group that has staged a number of attacks inside Pakistan recently, from operating out of Afghanistan, and terror attacks inside Pakistan restarted with increasing frequency. According to the Centre for Research and Security Studies, in 2024, at least 685 Pakistani security personnel were killed in terror attacks or counter-terrorist operations, up about 40% compared to 2023, and the highest figure since 2015. 2025 looks unlikely to be much better. In the first 9 months of this year, 512 security personnel have already been killed in hundreds of terror attacks and counter-terrorism operations. Anyway, in response to these terror attacks, Pakistan has occasionally carried out strikes on TTP targets inside Afghanistan, but these were, until recently, confined to sparsely populated border areas. However, after a spate of terror attacks in October, Pakistan escalated by launching airstrikes on targets in Kabul. This intended message was pretty clear. Pakistan was signalling that they would hold the Taliban directly responsible for attacks against Pakistan by terror groups operating out of Afghanistan, and that Taliban sites in Kabul would therefore be legitimate targets for retaliation. This sparked a week-long skirmish between Taliban and Pakistan troops along the Afghan-Pakistan border, which was probably the most lethal skirmish between the two sides since the Taliban's return to power, and prompted Pakistan to launch more airstrikes on targets in Kabul and Kandahar, Afghanistan's second largest city. The fighting only stopped after Qatar and Turkey stepped in to force the two sides to a ceasefire, and negotiations on a more permanent peace deal began in Istanbul. Unfortunately, and as we predicted back in our last video on the topic, these negotiations didn't go anywhere. The basic issue was that the Taliban still refused to do anything about the various terror groups operating out of Afghanistan. But even if they had nominally agreed to do something, it probably wouldn't have happened. After all, the Taliban nominally signed on to the Doha Agreement in 2020, which committed the Taliban to preventing terror groups from operating out of Afghanistan in exchange for a total US withdrawal. But this obviously didn't happen. Moreover, it's not clear the Taliban actually has the capacity to suppress the various terror groups operating across the country. A 2023 United Nations report, for instance, estimated that more than 20 regional and international terrorist organisations, including Al-Qaeda, now operate in Afghanistan, which puts quite a lot on the Taliban's proverbial plate. Moreover, the Taliban isn't a united organisation, and even if the main factions agreed to Pakistan's demands, other factions would probably continue to cooperate with their favoured terror groups. Anyway, this is why, on November the 8th, one day after yet another skirmish along the Afghan-Pakistan border, the Taliban announced that they were withdrawing from negotiations, with a spokesperson claiming that Pakistan was demanding Afghanistan take responsibility for Pakistan's internal security, a demand he described as beyond Afghanistan's capacity. Tensions then skyrocketed on November the 11th, when a suicide bombing in Pakistan's capital Islamabad, for which a faction of the TTP has since claimed responsibility, killed at least 12 people and injured at least 30 more. This might sound like just another terror attack, but terror attacks in Pakistan's capital are remarkably rare. This was the first terror attack in Islamabad since 2022, and the deadliest since 2008, when a suicide attack at the Marriott Hotel killed 54 people. This provoked an understandably furious reaction from Pakistan's foreign minister, who signalled that Pakistan would resume airstrikes against the Taliban, and even told a Pakistani news outlet that full-on war with Afghanistan, quote, could definitely happen. He also posted on X that Pakistan is in a state of war, and described the Islamabad suicide attack as a wake-up call. The strikes have also reignited tensions with India, with the foreign minister accusing India of sponsoring terror groups inside Afghanistan in an attempt to destabilise Pakistan, an allegation which was quickly dismissed as baseless by India's Ministry of External Affairs. To be honest, we don't know if these allegations are true, but it's at least true that India and the Taliban have become friendlier in recent months. In October, for instance, the Taliban's foreign minister paid his first visit to India since the Taliban's return to power in 2021, and India then announced that it would be reopening the embassy in Kabul, which was shut 4 years ago. This comes at a particularly tense time for India, where security-related anxieties have been riding high since the car bombing in New Delhi on Monday that killed 13 people. The first deadly terror attack in India's capital since 2011, and the deadliest since 2008. So, what happens next? Well, it's hard to say, but Pakistan doesn't really have any good options. The Taliban have shown neither the willingness nor the ability to expel the various terror groups operating out of Afghanistan, but further attacks on the Taliban are unlikely to make things better, and might even make things worse. If airstrikes or even a limited invasion destabilise the country, for instance, this would probably create an even more fragmented government, which would find it even more difficult to implement Pakistan's demands. Nonetheless, a sustainable solution is sorely needed, not just for Pakistan and Afghanistan, but also the wider region, which is facing a host of security challenges. By now, you've probably heard all about this story online, but depending where you read about it, you might have heard a completely different side to the story. So, how are you supposed to know what's real and what's being fabricated by one side or the other? Well, this week we're lucky enough to be sponsored by Ground News, who are experts at helping you rethink how you consume media online. Their website and app collects thousands of articles, putting them all in one easy-to-access place, to help expose outlets' political bias, how reliable their reporting practices are, and who owns them, with all of their information backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organisations. Whenever we're faced with a nuanced story, we just head straight to Ground News to get the breakdown on everything we need to understand it better. For example, if we wanted to learn more about the recent suicide bombing in Islamabad, we just need to look on Ground News to see that 339 sources are reporting on it, with most of the coverage coming from the left, with the left emphasising the human cost and the right focusing more on the national security implications. You can quickly see who owns the outlets behind each story, and that context matters. Once you start noticing how independent sources frame stories differently than massive conglomerates, it changes how you read the news. We've even used it to filter out corporate-owned media when we want a wider mix of voices, or hone in on the highest rated factual outlets. It's one of the few tools that actually lets you shape your media diet, not the algorithm. You know that it's no secret just how much we appreciate Ground News. Having such an incredible tool to help us stay fully informed and aware of political bias is a game changer in today's media landscape. As such, we've partnered with them to offer TLDR viewers 40% off their Premium Access Vantage plan. All you have to do is subscribe through the link in the description, go to ground.news/TLDR, or scan the QR code on screen, and you'll be supporting an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent.